so much for joining us. My name is Mandy Fernandez. I'm the Policy Director with the American Civil Liberties Union of Hawaii. I want to mahalo the organizers of this group. I see Michael in the room. Anybody else who is, can you raise your hand if you were involved in organizing Queer Day at the Capitol? Yay! Thank you so much. This has been really fantastic. If you haven't already been up to the 4th floor, please do go check out the booths up there. And, oh, is it over? Oh, sorry. Everybody's here in the room. Excellent. Even better. Well, welcome to the afternoon panel of the day, Federal Attacks on Queer Lives. We know that not just since January 2025, but for a while now, we've been seeing at the executive level, at the federal level, coordinated attacks on the rights that have been hard won over the past, over decades of activism, and many of those in the room have been part of that activism for decades now here in Hawaii. I'm honored to introduce our panelists today. I'll be moderating this discussion. First, I'll introduce Jen Wilbur, who's a personal friend of mine and somebody I've known for years, an absolutely fantastic advocate. She's currently the Hawaii State Director for Planned Parenthood Alliance Advocates. And she, as State Director, Jen directs field organizing, communications, policy, and electoral effort to promote, protect, and advance sexual health, education, and reproductive rights in Hawaii. Welcome, Jen. We also have, oh, yes. Thank you, please clap. Nikos Leverins, the Policy and Advancement Manager with Hawaii Health and Harm Reduction Center. Nikos Leverins is the Policy and Advancement Manager at the Hawaii Health and Harm Reduction Center. Born and raised in Honolulu, Nikos is a graduate of Maryknoll High School, Occidental College, and McGeorge School of Law at University of the Pacific. He returned to Oahu after 25 years in California and a brief residency at Upaya Zen Center in Santa Fe, New Mexico. In 2024, Nikos was profiled by Honolulu Civil Beat, which has published several of his opinion editorials and helped place a ballot measure that repealed an anti-marriage equality provision in the Hawaii State Constitution. He also serves as the president of Drug Policy Forum of Hawaii. In 2025, he served on the Penal Code Review Committee. Nikos has also served on the State Commission to Improve Standards of Conduct, the Foley Commission, the Dual Use of Cannabis Task Force, and the Breakthrough Therapies Force. Thank you, Nikos. Welcome. And finally, we have Donovan Kamakani Albano. He is our policy fellow here at ACLU of Hawaii, so he's very near to my heart. Kamakani is the policy fellow where he supports legislative advocacy efforts to protect civil rights and liberties in Hawaii, including gender equity and LGBTQ+ rights. Raised in the Ahupua'a of Kalihi, he is the Mahu poet of Kanaka Uiwi, Ilocano, and Puerto Rican descent. Kamakani received a BA in Ethnic Studies and an MA in Indigenous Politics from the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Welcome, Kamakani. So how this is going to work, because we only have one microphone up here, is I'm going to ask, the first hour is going to be a moderated discussion, and I provided the panelists with some pre-prepared questions. And then after about an hour or so, maybe even shorter than that, I would love to open it up to audience Q&A. We have a small enough group that I think it would be fine if folks just raise their hands, and I'll help moderate the audience Q&A. Does that sound good? Awesome. All right, so the title of this panel, of course, is From Policy to Protection, Defending Queer Lives Against Federal Attacks. We're going to examine federal threats to MAHU, LGBTQIA+, and QTPI+ rights, which some people pronounce cutie pie, which I find adorable, including current and emerging policies while exploring the role of state and local actions to protect civil rights, safety, and bodily autonomy. So opening it up to any of our panelists, but we can probably just go down the line here. What are the most urgent federal threats right now to these rights in our communities, and how are they showing up in Hawaii specifically?
You want me to go first, huh? So, you know, the list is so long, from the maltreatment of trans and LGBTQ people in federal facilities, including the ICE facility. I encourage people to look at a Guardian article that really details the the maltreatment, including sexual assault and forced labor, that they're subject to in the ICE facilities in Louisiana. And there's a demand letter that the ACLU and others have issued last year requesting more information on that. And it's really a reprehensible situation, just in terms of not respecting people's innate worth and dignity. I know that our trans and LGBTQ folks are not alone in getting maltreatment from our federal authorities in ICE in this regime, but I feel that there's particular animus directed against trans and LGBTQ folks. Another thing that I want people, I think everybody in this place is cognizant of, is that this administration intends to ban trans people from the military. It's already done so. Fortunately, in a case Talbot v. USA, that has not gone to effect yet. And I want people to consider just how far we've come in recent decades. It was just 3.5 decades ago where we had don't ask, don't tell being sort of the so-called compromise position after the Reagan administration really ramped up its anti-gay enforcement in the military, which has its roots actually in the lavender scare of the Eisenhower era and probably a little bit before that. But it was a time when gay people were thoroughly marginalized, dehumanized, vilified as potential security threats, communist agents, and to be honest, why were people viewed as such back then? It's because same-sex conduct, sexual conduct was illegal in many states. And thankfully that's no longer the case, although that really wasn't settled until 2003 in the Lawrence decision. So we like to say we've come a long way, but in some ways the past is really coming back, in terms of a backlash, a very concerted backlash. And I recall during the first Trump administration, soon after RAND issued its report finding that transgender service members did not constitute, a threat to unit cohesion, troop morale, and all these things that we heard in the debate over whether or not gay people were entitled to serve, not should serve, were entitled to serve as a U.S. citizen, willing to serve their country. I just remember a third of a century ago now it was, to hear Colin Powell defend, excluding gays from the military, and it really, really struck me as unjust at the time. So the past is prologue in this administration. I could go into the various executive orders and the legal maneuvering around those executive orders, but the American Academy of Pediatrics today issued a lawsuit or filed a lawsuit against the Federal Trade Commission, accusing it of retaliation for continuing the practice of gender-affirming care. And the bottom line for me, and I'll end with this, is that when it comes to accessing healthcare, when it comes to giving people, sexual and gender minorities, recognizing our innate dignity and worth, we really have to take a posture of no retreat, no surrender when it comes to civil rights for trans and LGBTQ folks. Mahalo.
Mahalo. I think sort of building off of that, sort of when I think about federal attacks, I think a lot about how, in addition to the executive orders, there's just a violent narrative shift around how we're talking about everyone's fundamental right to bodily autonomy and privacy at the end of the day. So much so that we're seeing an unprecedented amount of anti-trans bills being considered across the U.S. It's only mid-February, and 690 anti-trans bills have already been considered in the U.S. And that's absolutely horrible. Last year, there were over 1,020 anti-trans bills being considered in the United States. What all of these things do are to change this narrative shift around who gets to live a life, who gets to be seen and heard, who gets to feel safe in our communities. And we're seeing that trickling down to how various states are navigating and creating policies around whether a healthcare provider providing gender-affirming care should serve a life term imprisonment for practicing that care. That's something that's being considered in Maryland right now. We're also seeing this whole narrative around quote unquote ideology and what this means of how how the federal government is perpetuating this idea of othering and creating things that are considered mental disorders. And all of this together, whether it's in education, in sports, in the military, all these different facets are about trying to change the narrative about who gets to be seen and heard. And I think that's something that we really need to continue to pay attention to, because at the end of the day, this is about how we all have access to our own bodily sovereignty and what that means as we move forward in how we build relationships and safe communities.
And adding on to that, as I was going through the executive orders and just kind of the timeline since the second term took effect, the words that came up into my mind were just to scare, intimidate, marginalize, and erase. Like the goal of all of this is to do those things. And then at the same time, like allies, we're all trying to band together and ask those folks that are being scared, intimidated, right, to step up and tell their stories and you know, speak out. And that is a scary thing. And so I think in Hawaii, how do we create spaces where we come together as a community and create spaces where it is safe for people to stand up and tell their story and speak out? I think that that's something that we're going to have to evolve to figure out how to do, but because it's needed. Like the storytelling is very needed, but it's scary. It's a very scary time for so many folks to be speaking up and advocating for themselves. And so how do we, as allies, help in that effort to protect and shield those folks and tell their stories if needed be, to amplify them and get them in the right spaces, to talk to the right people. Yeah, but it was just the timeline of things that have happened since like January 20th of 2025 have accelerated, and I saw the same thing happen basically with abortion care and REPA rights the first term, or we're seeing the second term kind of going after trans folks, and how do we stop this and protect everyone that needs to be protected, because that's not who we are.
Before I hand it back to Mandy here, I just wanted to talk a little bit about my organization, Hawaii Health and Harm Reduction Center. We have a transgender services program, Ku'uana Project, that I've written many grants for and secured funding from the continent and a few places here in Hawaii as well. And if you know a trans person who needs support or assistance with name changes, with support groups, please do so. We also now have a gender affirming care clinic in our Kaka'ako office. Thankfully, Dr. Rick is now full-time on board with us. And I also wanted to say that just in about a month's time, on March 20th, we're going to have an event, as we do every year. March 20th is Transgender Day of Visibility. A few years ago, it was the largest gathering on the Capitol for that year. It was right after the pandemic, and we had a really, really excellent turnout of about 400 folks. It's abated a little bit, given that people have gotten back to their lives. But I really encourage people here. I'm preaching to the choir, but please spread the word. Bring your friends, bring your loved ones. The trans community needs our support at this very critical time.
Thank you. So Are there any specific federal actions and responses to those federal actions that you'd like to highlight from executive orders or lawsuits? I know that recently the federal government has sent an investigation letter to the state DOE for its trans inclusive policies. But would anybody like to comment on a specific federal action? You're not allowed to say no.
Oh.
Like, no, I'm just. No, I'm kidding. You are. If nobody wants to comment on it now, but
Well, we do know that that states' attorneys generals have been fighting back, and one of the things about the need for a gender affirming care shield law is to protect Hawaii patients and providers from very opportunistic litigants on the continent and very vicious attorneys general on the continent to ensure that people have access to the care they need here without interference from those folks. It's unfortunate that we haven't had a shield care law yet, but I also want to encourage people to get involved. I forget what the particular bill number is, if somebody can bring it up.
HB 1875.
So this is a real priority bill for the LGBTQ community. I have the numbers jumbled in my head because I've been working on so many bills lately. It's time for us to engage this process, and when it comes to the federal level, really just send a note to your representative and to your senator and let them know that you're paying attention. I know it sounds kind of like trite and not necessarily a great thing to do and maybe a waste of time, but they do pay attention. So if you call them, about a particular issue, they will listen and be pithy. So that's why I am encouraging people to take this posture of no retreat, no surrender for civil rights for our trans folks. So I could go into the weeds, but I really don't want to. The other thing I want to bring up in the context of people accessing needed care, I like to forward the WHO definition of health, which means that health is just not the absence of disease or infirmity, but health actually is, the full physical, psychological, emotional, and social well-being. And that should be the baseline for our sexual and gender minority community, and even for all Americans. What we're seeing now at the federal level is a full frontal assault on the basic right to health care for a historically disfavored, marginalized, and dehumanized category of folks, less than 1% of the larger population. They need our support. Our community needs our support. We must be active, we must be vocal, and we must call hate for hate, and not counter hate with hate, but counter hate with love and understanding. So, anybody else?
I think in addition to sort of the DOE's policy that you mentioned earlier, Mandy, I think there's it's important to consider with the statistics that I shared about how many bills are being considered that are anti-trans, that a majority of them are also educational, like impact education, whether that's the right to use proper pronouns, or that's the ability to participate in sports. And we're seeing all of these different kinds of policies that are taking and happening in state legislatures that are active right now. I shared one earlier about how Maryland's considering a life-term imprisonment for a healthcare provider who provides gender-affirming care. But there's even other states that are right now reviewing legislation that deal with sort of this idea of what, and I'm quoting, this ideology of transgenderism as a mental disorder. And these are things that are happening like actively right now that people are fighting against. And with this narrative shift that I shared, I think it's important to contextualize also how in Hawaii this can mean and look a lot differently culturally, with understanding how this affects Kanaka Maoli and Pacific Islander people in the context of of that are different from Western constructions of gender and sexual articulations and constructions, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. But I think it's important to see how even in legislation and the ways that like the federal government is talking about things in their legislation or just outright through executive orders, is this hard, rigid articulation of a gender binary, and also using very restrictive language. And that is something that I think needs to be, even those little details, at least for me, when I see that, I'm like, that alone is incredibly harmful. And so thinking about how, and maybe this is me being a writer, I think a lot about language, and so how we articulate our relationships to one another, and how that shapes how we view ourselves, and who can be their authentic selves, I think really matters. And there's just lots of litigation and also legislation that's being reviewed, that's happening right now, that I think is happening with whether people realize it or not. There's a whole kind of way of a new, maybe not a new way, but a different way of how people are articulating and internalizing that kind of narrative.
I was just going to share, as far as fighting back, we were in the middle of a multi-year sex ed grant, and we were doing really intensive work in Kalihi, and the federal government came and told us that we could no longer use write down anything regarding gender identity or transgender status in our education. And we, along with, I think it was 13 other states, sued the federal government. It's still in court, but until that goes through, right, we had to pivot and use different funds, right, to even keep those educators on board. But I think that's one way we're trying to fight back, is fighting them in court. But it also takes a lot of money and a lot of time, and that's what they're trying to do, to try to create chaos. But also on the state level, I think the ways that we can be more proactive is, like, we introduced a bill, or had a bill that's in the women's package that is interference with a healthcare facility, to really try to create some more safety for the folks entering and exiting healthcare facilities. Because people come to Planned Parenthood, we offer gender-affirming hormone care. We offer, a multiple other services, including abortion, STI vasectomy. But people should be able to make any kind of healthcare decision they want, and be able to know that they can enter and exit that in a safe way, and all the time. So really hoping that goes through, and Washington's had it for a couple decades now. So that's just a way I think we can be proactive in our steps, and really showing, even as a statement, we want to continue to protect folks in Hawaii for any type of medical decision that you want to make for yourself.
Thank you so much for that. Kamakani, I'll start with you on this one, because you started touching on it with your response. But in Hawaii, how do these federal attacks uniquely impact Mahu and queer and trans Pacific Islander people, given our cultural history and legacy of colonization?
Yeah, so I'll first kind of like uplift and contextualize. Like, as a Mahu person myself, how do I articulate this, what seems different from what might be under the umbrella of LGBTQ+, because it's very culturally different in a way. And I would invite people to also look towards the work of Papaolala Kahi's work in their No Ka Mahui toolkit, as well as their Hapu'u listening tour report, which is really incredible to help kind of contextualize a different set of cultural perspective. So for me, also in relationship to my own body, I think about this as one being like Kanaka Maoli means that I am genealogically and intimately connected to this Aina that we are on. And so I think about my relationship to Mahu as a deep relationality between myself and my body and this Aina. And what that means is when I think about colonization and how that shapes our understanding as Indigenous people connected to this Aina, and this is also for Pacific Islanders who are intimately connected to their homelands as well. I think a lot about how this intimacy means the connection to how our Aina is shaped. So, for example, when Aina is desecrated or impacted in some way, that shapes how that sort of cultural and spiritual connection that I think impacts how that shapes community well-being and things like that. So it's a very like cultural and spiritual kind of connection when I think about that. And what these federal attacks do, I think, are in general, when we feel like we've been severed, those relationships have been severed or connections have been severed because of things that impact our Aina or how we're able to be ourselves on our own homelands, I think really shapes how we might think of it differently, especially when it comes to issues related to generational trauma or lack of culturally responsive care or services that I think are different from sort of constructions of what might be viewed under like Western ideas of gender and sexual identity. So for me, I mean, it's very much about how we make decisions about our body in connection with this Aina, and the ways that federal attacks shape that. Often, even decisions that make that try to articulate sort of things that are trying to be responsive. I think about how there's a different cultural perspective that is important to recognize and often is left out. And so I think about how we can articulate and build relationships that way. I think, for example, when it comes to legislation and also policy-related things, how are we being in community with those people who have that cultural knowledge rooted in this place to hope to be able to resist those kind of federal narratives around how we build those relationships. And this is for gender-affirming care, it's for mental health care, medical care, but also like how we are able to be, what it means to be in relationship with this place and how Hawaii allows us to be in relationship with one another that creates this kind of kuleana that we have to understand how these cultural sensitivities are important to how we move forward and resist federal attacks.
Yes, I was in a very illuminating conversation with some Native Hawaiian and Pacifica trans women about this very subject, and I'm not going to speak for them or on behalf of them. But one of the things that came up was that we should be very careful about appropriating, the Mahu, and I'm not criticizing you at all, but appropriating, the Native Hawaiian Mahu identity and kind of just casually putting it on this larger debate, because the reality is that when we talk about law, when we talk about rights under law, it's very much a Western colonial paradigm, and that it doesn't. It's the metaphor that was brought up was the sandbox. We're kicking sand in the sandbox. On behalf, some of us, who are sexual and gender minorities, like to kick sand when sand gets kicked in our faces. But at the same time, we're in a land and we're in a culture where this was not even an issue. It was just kind of the reality of the culture, and that even talking about it is just, I don't want to say it's nonsense, but it's just not an exact fit. However, You know, when we talk about intersectionality and the intersectional transphobia and racism, I had to look it up on my Kindle because I remember this sentence very vividly from When They Call You a Terrorist, the Black Lives Matter memoir by Patrisse Cullors and Asha Bandele. It was there, and it really struck me in black and white when I saw it, is that the most criminalized person on the planet is a black trans woman who cannot pass. And this was written in the wake of Ferguson, which gave birth to, you know, what came to be the Black Lives Matter movement. And when we think about, you know, the unique culture of this place, we also have to be cognizant and bear witness to the culture of other places in this broad nation of ours. And when we have transphobia, homophobia, and racism, you know, really distilled in legislatures and in southern states, gosh, you know, Tennessee has become such a hotbed of animus and bigotry through the legislative process. I remember I was on an AIDS United a lobby day a few years ago. I think it was 2023, and they were seeking to refuse Ryan White funding. That's federal money to help people living with HIV and for HIV prevention. And then doing a little bit of research for this panel here, I come across this case, Out Memphis versus Lee, where literally black and trans cis women, you know, we're still living in an era where HIV is criminalized, and that if you're living with HIV and you're engaged with sex work, whether you're virally suppressed or not, you can be branded a violent sex offender for life. And there are people in jail right now because HIV is still criminalized in many states. It's a real eye-opener. So one of the things that I think those of us who are sexual and gender minorities and those who are allies, we really need to pay attention and to bear witness of the people who are suffering, not just in our communities, but across, you know, this American polity. And we have to challenge our would-be allies when they don't stand up. You know, one of the things I really was ticked off about with the 2024 election was that you had the former Attorney General and U.S. Senator from the great state of California falling silent when it came to trans folks. They, them versus us. It's like they, them are us. We are us. How hard would it have been to counter, you know, the bigotry and the hatred and just lay it down? It's like all of us or none. Who are you, you know, to point the finger at somebody and to act like a schoolyard bully and look to put that into law? Well, the schoolyard bully is exactly what we got right now. And we have a schoolyard bully wreaking havoc on our sexual and gender minority communities and immigrant communities, and the list goes on, because we had a campaign that was unwilling to bear witness to the suffering of the people it purported to be advocates for.
I want to follow up on something that was raised around intersectionality and how these different causes intersect with one another and how our collective liberation is inextricably linked. I want to start with Jen this time, because you work across the spectrum with the through line of bodily autonomy. How do you approach this work right now?
I feel like our work really hasn't stopped since, I mean, the Roe was a big moment, and I just think it's just been continuing since then. And I think that the attack on trans is not new. I don't think it's been amped up. I think it's always been there. It's more, I think, in your face at the moment, but I think it's always been there. we've been thinking about, and people have been talking about doing a constitutional amendment for a long time, especially just for repro, and to protect abortion. And that's not something that we think that we need here in Hawaii for many reasons. So we've been thinking about how do we protect everyone in a constitutional amendment, perhaps, and thinking about just really doing something around our Equal Rights Amendment to really further our protections for both trans community and repro in one. And I think that's something that we've been actively really pursuing and investigating, and what we can do. And I think that's something that we're trying to look forward to in 28 and pulling around and really looking at beefing up Article 1, Section 3, which is the equality of rights, and really digging into that and expanding that as a way for us to all be included in one vote. Because I think if we're doing it piecemeal, I just don't think that's the way to go. And our abortion rights, we believe, are very solidly protected under the privacy sections of our Constitution. So, but we could always get better, right? And our Constitution always can be better and stronger. So that's one way I think that we're trying to be work more just with everyone, intersecting all the communities. And I think that's one way it will also bring us together in that fight, because we all are in it together. And I think that we've been doing work kind of siloed, many of us, because it's hard. You just get in there, you get in the trenches, and you get working. But people are doing kind of similar work that kind of overlaps with yours. So I think trying to find ways in coalition spaces that really work, so we can all work smarter, and realize that, yeah, everything kind of overlaps here. We're all one little bridge away from each other.
I'll say on the piece about intersectionality that I think that cis heteropatriarchy is a part of the settler colonial project. And I think when I think about colonialism as a system that, especially for Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders, and when I think about how this system attempts to try to shape how access to self-determination includes bodily autonomy. I think about that a lot. But I also think about how Native Hawaiians are disproportionately overrepresented in the criminal legal system, are disproportionately incarcerated, disproportionately houseless on their own ancestral homelands. All of these things are intersectional issues that are that often can't be ignored, because they're all of them touch upon the idea of how one has access to bodily autonomy, but also the ability to live and belong in their communities. And when they're severed and separated, often sometimes even displaced and evicted from their homelands, these are all intersectional issues that happen. And I think there needs to continue to be kind of conversations about how all of these things intersect to become a part of colonialism's project here in Hawaii, and something that cannot be ignored and needs to continue to be talked about. So I'll talk about that more later.
If I could just really briefly add, I just want to say that, on this subject, particularly with the continued dispossession of Native Hawaiians in their homeland, again, one of the things we need to do as allies or as Kanaka, if you're Kanaka, is to bear witness, to continue to bear witness and speak out to the ongoing dispossession of Native Hawaiians. And it's not unique in the United States of America. It's how this country was founded, was through dispossession and displacement. And we are in the midst of a radical rewriting of history, where we have a regime in Washington right now that is intent on quite literally whitewashing American history here on the 250th anniversary of the nation's founding. And the list is so long, but the backlash and the intentional cultivation of myopic ignorance amongst the people and forwarding narratives, not just in this country, but elsewhere as well, that are patently false, that are forwarded to undergird white supremacy in this country and across the globe, is absolutely odious, and it must be called out and it must be challenged.
Ooh, so I think, so we focused the first part on kind of defining the problem, what's coming through from the federal government. And before we move into more about how we should respond, I want to take a minute for respite. And what queer communities have done really well throughout history is defining spaces for joy. And so I'm going to ask the corny, but I think necessary question of how are we finding joy right now? Whoever would like to start.
I'll say first, for me as a poet, I think writing poetry is allowing me to feel joy. Oftentimes I write a lot about sort of this transitional period of this moment where I feel like I'm starting to be able to be in relationship with my body, and how that's allowing me to be in relationship with others, and allowing me to be more comfortable being in community, because it was a really scary time for me. And sometimes still, whatever that means can look really different for me. So I think writing poetry and writing all about just being intimate and unapologetically Mahu has been so empowering for me. And being able to be more in relationship with the places that I'm from, learning about my family's genealogy has been filling up my cup a lot lately. So really it's about returning to the stories that have always been there, just like how Mahu people have always been here. I think about how have I been able to return to those kinds of stories, and being able to like allow that to be embodied with myself is bringing me a lot of joy.
I'll start from a work perspective. I think we're trying to intermix joy, like we're having sex toy bingos and, drag queen, bingos and things. And tonight having ledge trivia, things like that to bring joy. And on a personal level, I adopted a dog so I could just pour love into, some other little being. And also it just distracts me during the day. Like, you think we need those distractions. Like, I have to actually go on a walk and get outside. So getting outside, seeing the sun, and doing those things, I think is just like ground you. And when you get really in the weeds in something that's not so great.
I'm glad you brought up the professional context, because Hawaii Health and Harm Reduction Center is very big on wellness, and we don't just talk the talk, but we walk the walk, and actually dedicate resources to cultivate wellness amongst our staff and our management. And I've written grants that helped support that over the years as well. And among the activities we do, we like to, this is Hawaii, so it's no biggie, but we like to eat together often. And we have hosted, lunches. We also have, field trips, to the park and to the beach, not too often, once a year usually. But we also offer a range of activities. Over the years, it's gone from everything from painting to crafting. I do, meditation practice and mindful movement. And it really is dependent on where people are at and what they feel like they want to offer right now. So I encourage organizations like the ACLU to explore that as well, and maybe some of the organizations you're all working with as well. Personally, ever since the pandemic, actually, my wellness story is actually quite long, and my wellness peak was actually when I was just leaving Sacramento, and I was doing yoga at least 3 to 4 times a week. meditating for a solid hour every day and longer with day-long retreats, multiple residential retreats, and then going into community, and eating a largely plant-based diet. But all of that went to pot when I moved back to Hawaii, right? So, so right now I really make time for contemplative practice alone and in groups. I do a centering prayer group at Central Union. Most Sundays I'll do Quaker meeting, and then I have my own practice as well. I also think that, for me, it's very important. I love the word, and I love talking about the word. So I'm on an online book clubs that are based in California, Northern California, and talking about spiritual books. And then I'm also in a book club here in Honolulu that is a little bit more eclectic and kind of geared toward what used to be called the yuppie set. So if you're interested in good books and fun company, please see me after the panel.
I love that. Thank you all for sharing. Jen, I've also taken the pet route. I just need lots of little animals to nurture, and that really soothes me and feeds me. So I'm currently on a lobby to our operations director to allow us to bring the dogs into the office. Tracy, if you're watching. All right, so let's get into solutions. I know it is. It's on. It's going to be airing on Alelo. Oh, so would you like to revise or recant? All right, so a lot of the focus right now has been how do we build this firewall to protect our residents of Hawaii, our communities in Hawaii? And what are we seeing? What are we seeing on the ground here? What are the types of policies? What are the types of practices, types of laws? What's the change we want to see here to shield as much as possible our communities from what's going on at the federal level? I know we've already started talking about the SHIELD law. Will one of you do me a favor and kind of define what that is, what we're adding to it, what it started as, and why it's necessary?
So I'll just summarize and say a big wonderful thing about the proposed bill which is HB 1875, to add gender affirming care protections to our existing SHIELD law. Also strengthens protections for reproductive health care, and a big part of it that's really exciting is to make protections against abusive litigation as well as out-of-state judgments. So, for example, a person from Texas should not be, and who comes to Hawaii to seek gender affirming care should not, their providers should not be facing any kind of repercussions for providing gender affirming care here. And so there are adding protections for that, and as well as things related to medical malpractice, because essentially no provider and their patient should fear either loss of coverage from their insurance or also their loss of licensure or fear of that kind of loss of licensure or that affects their practice. We've seen federal attacks be used as a mechanism to incite fear, and also these medical decisions between patients and their providers should remain private, so that adds sort of privacy protections as well. The government, outside states, or the court should not be interfering with those kinds of private medical decisions. So that's a little bit about the SHIELD law specifically. I'll let others also share other kinds of things, but I just wanted to share kind of from a cultural perspective and what I think is in how we defend queer and trans rights, is also understanding how we're in community with indigenous knowledge systems and how we're able to return. And I can talk a little bit more about that, but again, kind of returning to that distinction between Western articulations of gender and sexual identity and constructions versus cultural ones, and that kind of understanding that intersectionality piece. Does anyone else want to add?
I just want to add that in addition to this proposed SHIELD law, which would strengthen and protect, you know, the practice of gender affirming care in our state, our Attorney General has actually done a fairly good job at joining other states' attorneys general in contesting a lot of the overreach by this current regime. So this administration deserves to be congratulated on that front. The Green administration should also be congratulated on joining the West Coast Health Alliance to ensure that whatever may happen at the federal level, there will be a solid baseline commitment to public health, including making appropriate vaccinations widely available to the residents of Hawaii. In terms of the micro level, again, I want to reemphasize, you know, the importance of community and allyship and coming together, you know, face to face and supporting one another on events like Transgender Day of Visibility, or writing a note to the legislature saying that you support legislation like the gender affirming shield care law that will protect our folks.
I just wanted to add, like, please support all these bills. The SHIELD law, the interference bill, there's an EMTALA reso. But I just wanted to also talk about access, and like, these laws are amazing and we have really strong laws, but our access to healthcare in general and our access to sexual and reproductive health really falls short of where we need it to be. And I think that's just another layer of things that we need to work on and really lift up as a community, because I think often when folks look at the map and look at our laws, they see how great everything is, and like, Hawaii is great. Don't really need our help, but we actually do need help. We really need help outside of urban urban Honolulu. Access is lacking. In neighbor islands, you know, anyway, I think we know it, but what's being done from like, outside of us on the ground talking about it, like real action, real movement from, in these laws. Like, we're trying to beef up our laws, but we're not really in these, nothing's touching access. So how do we talk about that and get movement on that in a real way?
All right, we're almost to the audience Q&A. I wanted to ask, what role do like our city and counties play in this?
I think back to access, I think that city and counties can, because they are more entrenched in their actual communities, they're on the ground, they can provide perhaps smaller grants or things to nonprofits doing the work so they can further their work. I think as far as protections, they can assess how we can better access safely, you know, without the interference bill. How are folks being the safety, right? How is the police responding to everything? Do the police? I just found out actually from health and harm reduction folks that there's a section of the police that are trauma informed to deal with certain situations. And is that happening? I just found out it was happening here. Is that happening on every county? I think that's where city and county folks can really help to further protections and guidance and money, get those money flowing on the county level.
Yeah, I'll just say in addition to that, because I was also going to mention about sort of like the police and like law enforcement piece, but I think also the city and county also plays a role in access to housing as well, and being able to provide more housing services. That includes funding, but also being able to increase like programming for that, whether it's Section 8 housing, but because housing is a very is a big issue across Hawaii, but it also does disproportionately affect like queer, trans, and Mahu Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders too, and I say that from sort of like my own personal experiences. So I think all of those different kinds of things, especially when it deals with funding, like you shared about Jen, I think is a big piece.
I think it's critically important for us, not just at the county level, but at the state level, probably more at the state level because they have the capacity to do so, is to collect data about our community. And we're seeing kind of a desire at the federal level to erase trans and LGB folks from even being counted. ICE no longer reports, for example, the number of trans inmates it has in its county, in its possession. It went from I think 6 people to 0, or it just disappeared overnight. One of the things that's been good about this state is that it's made an effort through its Department of Health to address, to monitor the needs of our non-cishet youth and queer people of all ages. There are 2 reports that came out prior to the pandemic looking specifically at transgender health, and that was very welcome. However, we do need data from the criminal legal system regarding not just hate crimes, but also to what extent are non-cishet people involved in the criminal legal system. Having worked with folks from the trans community for years now, I can tell you that being trans subjects oneself. You're subjected to a range of traumas that include physical, sexual, and psychological abuse, underemployment, undereducation, and just not being able to participate fully in economic and civic life. It's hard to say that because we should aspire to have a polity whereby everybody is able to participate fully, but you can only participate fully if you're being counted and if you're being heard. And I guess that's all I'll say on that right now. On the county level, this current administration, although it is kind of MAGA light, it's actually done a very good job at beefing up its queer policies, and it's done so because we have a managing director from our community as well. So, we have the Le Puala Project on the nonprofit level, working with the city government to memorialize some of the markers of queer history here in Hawaii. So kudos to Dean and Joe for their efforts on that front. And just equality, that we need to keep at it.
Thank you so much for all of your comments. I want to open it up to the audience now, and how it can work is, I think the acoustics are good enough, or if you're able, no, I was gonna, oh, okay. Oh, okay, I know, I was gonna repeat the question. So if you have a question, if you're able to just raise your hand and I'll call on you, and if you ask your question, then I'll repeat it into the microphone for Olelo and the listeners at home. Does that work? All right. Opening up to audience questions. Who's got a question? Yes. So the question is around data collection of queer communities, and when does that veer more into surveillance? And where's the balance between knowing the data and knowing the who and the what, and protecting privacy for communities? Great question.
it's something that I think we've been talking to the administration about for a while, going back to abortion data and how that was being used. But I also want to flag that Senator Lee has a couple data privacy bills that are making its way. And I'm sorry, I don't have the numbers, but I can look it up after. But they are to prohibit the selling of search browser histories and that type of data that I think many of us don't even think about. And that we had a bill, last year, a couple years ago, it was about like geofencing and folks selling data that you don't even know is being sold, right? I think I was told like you go and buy X, Y, and Z, these 3 different types of things from like say a Target or something, that they sell that data and then like they determine basically you're pregnant based on those 3 things that you buy, and then you get targeted ads. So our data is being sold, and I don't think that's the kind of data you were talking about, but I think there's like so much data that's being sold that we don't even realize. So I think getting behind some of those data privacy bills could help, but also I think conversations need to be had with us as healthcare providers and others about the data that we're giving to the state and what is happening to that data after it leaves there to really protect, because I feel fairly confident right here in Hawaii that our data is being used for good things, but how much data really needs to be sent to the feds legally and protecting all of that does not need to be sent. But I have said we have had fruitful conversations, and but I think those conversations need to be ongoing because the threats keep coming.
Yeah, this is a very, very big question. You know, on the one hand, we have, you know, HIPAA, which protects medical privacy, but as Ms. Wilbur, you know, pointed out here, there's all sorts of ways that people can find out who you are and what you're up to. We are in the age of the algorithm and artificial intelligence, and whether those who collect, you know, data online know precisely who we are and what we want to do. And it's very unfortunate that at the federal and the state level, we do not have the kind of comprehensive regulation that's needed to protect individual privacy. And that it's even in non-online things, for example. You know, we just take a look at how we're marching full speed ahead on more photo red cameras, more speed cameras, more automatic license plate readers in this state, and we don't have any statewide law regarding the collection, retention, dissemination, use, and disposal of data collected through those mechanisms. So we need, at minimum, a statewide law. I believe other states have it. I'm not up on that particular area of law right now, but I know that California fashions itself to be a little bit progressive on that front, even, you know, with Silicon Valley. But, you know, goddamn, you know, in some ways, you know, it's unfortunate we've gotten to the point where, you know, we're living in a world that is driven by and influenced by, you know, organizations like Palantir, and we're just living in it right now. And we need to take our privacy back from the tech overlords, and we need to demand appropriate regulation. And I just fear that we're a bit late to the game on that, and intentionally so, on the part of the calculation of those involved in the political process who, you know, quite frankly, their most important constituents are the companies on K Street in Washington, D.C. So I encourage people to go to organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, who are really leading the charge on taking our privacy back on the electronic front.
I'll chime in and say, like, again, this is such a great question because it's valid. On one hand, you can't get funding for a problem that can't be defined. On the other hand, like, there is active surveillance happening. They're trying to get, you know, the federal government is currently taking action against Hawaii for not handing over its voter rolls, right? There is a very orchestrated effort to acquire data by the federal government from the states in a way that is intended to be used to suppress dissenting voice, right? And Nikos, it makes me think of, and I feel bad because in the beginning I was like, oh, Jen is my long friend, and Kamakani is very close to my heart, but Nikos is also very close to my heart. I want to be clear. We've worked together for years, and I was thinking about how it was right before, the onset of the pandemic, and we were working on facial recognition technology and trying to issue a moratorium on that statewide. And it feels like innocent times now. We were so young. We had no gray hair back then, wrinkle-free. But because of the pandemic, that really escalated a lot of the reliance in the government green lighting of biometric data collection. And it was faster than our laws could keep up with. We didn't have the legal infrastructure to address privacy in that setting. And because we have a part-time legislature, if you don't pass it one session, we gotta, unless you're gonna get the votes to convene a special session, like you're not gonna be able to address it until the next year. And by then, things will already have been in place at the airports or in motion. And it's really difficult to stop something that's already started, right? So I want to flag that. And again, I'm sorry we didn't have a simple answer, because that's a really difficult, complicated question that I think plagues a lot of us. And some good advice I heard on a policy panel at some point was, ask yourself why we're collecting this data. Who has access to this data? Is this absolutely necessary to collect this information? And why? What safeguards can we put around that? So it's really, data can be really powerful and is really important for policy making, but also defining right at the outset of what is absolutely necessary to accomplish your goal, and setting as many civil rights safeguards and privacy safeguards around it, and balancing that. Thank you for that question. Okay, anybody else? Our brilliant panelists here. Yes, Mr. Michael.
Where can people find more information?
Great question, Michael. So the question is, where can people find more information about how to fight back against the onset of this fascist regime? I mean, the ACLUHawaii.org. No, we're on Instagram, Facebook. There are so many local organizations, and I also, the ACLU has a big name, and so I want to spend this time actually to highlight that there are a lot of community care organizations, and it doesn't have to be a formal group. I've been seeing a lot of free markets. I've been seeing a lot of just of reliance on the gift economy, which I love. And there are bail funds, and there's nobody stopping us from getting together private funds to help with access to gender affirming care, right? We can get us through this, and community care, the gift economy, that's a really powerful way through.
If memory serves, the LGBTQ plus commission has a resource hub page on its website. So thank you for facilitating that, Commissioner.
I was going to say the same thing. And then I'll just highlight from sort of the cultural perspective that I was sharing. If people are looking to learn a little bit more about how Native Hawaiians contextualize this in terms of Mahue experiences, I highly recommend that you connect with Papa'olalokahi, because they're a Native Hawaiian health organization, and they provide a lot of really great resources and information on their website.
We also have a website and an Instagram page, and we try to lift up and share stories for other organizations where we can, and list the bills that we are working on and others that we're supporting, to try to lift up others. And also, you can always reach out if you have questions about anything or any of the bills. Feel free to email or call. We will help you yeah, and we try to table too. Try to get out into community for those folks. Not everyone loves the internet either, so try to get out into community and actually talk to people face to face, so they can ask questions and provide resources on all the services that we provide. Yeah.
To touch a bit more on how maybe ACLU can be of service to communities, we do Know Your Rights trainings year round. We do this in person. We do it over Zoom. We'll come to your house, literally anywhere. If you want to host a house party for like a testimony writing night, we can do that. We can do an advocacy training. We can come talk to your classroom. We can speak at your work. We can tailor these trainings to whatever you need. And that is part of what we fundraise to do. So please don't hesitate to reach out. We also do try to make advocacy resources as accessible and easy as possible. We send out action alerts nearly every week with upcoming hearings and sample testimony, talking points, and instructions for how to submit. And I believe we're hosting an advocacy training soon with Planned Parenthood, right? And so we're also hosting a habeas training for how to do habeas petitions if you're an attorney, to get trained up on that soon on the 24th. And we recently had, and we will have even more resistance trainings for what's going on at the federal level. How do we stand up against it and target the pillars of support of authoritarianism? And there will be many more of those. Unfortunately, we would all love to work ourselves out of a job and retire and become zookeepers or whatever, but that is not where we're at yet. But hopefully someday. But yeah. All right. Any other questions? If not, I'm happy to end a little bit early. I want to thank all of our panelists for sharing your Mana'o today, for coming on this stage, taking time out of your day. And thank you so much for all of the work that you're doing. And thank you to all of the organizers of Queer Day at the Capitol and all the attendees. This was absolutely wonderful, and I'm really honored to be here. So thank you. And Michael has, is the air times for Olelo, they posted somewhere? Yes. Yes, great. On social media for the commission.